Alright guys, let's talk about VR on Linux. So a few months ago, I decided that it was time to get into VR, and I got myself from eBay an HTC Vive Pre Kit. It was secondhand. This was the very first generation of VR hardware that Valve had put out, along with HTC, of course. And this is actually the pre-release version of the hardware that actually became the HTC Vive. Now, for all intents and purposes, this is pretty much identical to the first gen HTC Vive. But I mean, this is all the hardware. It's been heavily used by me and whoever had it before I did. And I don't really mean to do a review on a very old product right now. What I wanted to talk about is how this device, no matter how old it is at this point, allowed me to do. It allowed me to get into VR. And honestly, I don't care that this is old. I don't care that it's got problems, it's obsolete compared to, particularly I'm thinking about the Valve Index. I got it for very cheap, and it allowed me to experience something that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So VR is great and all that. You don't need to hear that from me. I'm probably the last person to jump on this bandwagon. Of course, that's not true, since apparently, according to the Steam surveys, VR users are about 2% of overall Steam users, which is pretty much a very small niche. So me playing VR on Linux means that I am a niche of a niche, and that's what most people using VR on Linux will tell you. This is probably the biggest reason why VR on Linux, it's got problems. There are some issues that need to be resolved, and probably the biggest reason why they still haven't been figured out is because there's not enough interest to actually work on these things. Once you're through the setup of the room and the devices, through Steam, you're immediately gonna notice that something isn't quite right. The situation with the actual SteamVR runtime on Linux is kind of weird right now. Because if you use the regular version of the SteamVR runtime or any of the later beta versions, you're gonna notice that things don't actually quite work all that well. First of all, the first thing you're gonna notice is that the Z depth is wrong inside of the actual SteamVR start environment. You're gonna notice that your controllers look weird, and if you look close enough, you can even see the base stations inside of that hub, and you can see that they also look weird. There is a rendering issue with the latest versions of SteamVR just on Linux that actually creates this weird and honestly kind of disorienting effect, particularly if it's the first time that you approach VR, and you're immediately going to see, to look at your controllers, and they already look weird and you don't know what's going on. First time I thought it was just a weird styling, but then I noticed that if I turn the controllers around, something was off. It's not that easy to describe. It's as if you're looking at the object from outside, but as if the surfaces that you're looking at are the ones that are inside the object. It's very weird, and I don't know how else I would explain it. And it doesn't help that when you bring up the SteamVR Dash, that's the sort of virtual screen that actually allows you to open up stuff and games and launch other things, the controllers actually render behind the actual dash because of this depth inversion issue, I guess. As for other things that don't really work on the actual SteamVR runtime, are the desktop view. So SteamVR has this very nice feature that lets you look at your actual desktop when you're inside of VR, and that's very useful if you like need to read a message or switching your microphone or adjusting your volume inside of VR, because the alternative is that you have to put your controllers away and then just like either remove your headset or just keep it hanging like halfway and then just control your computer with your mouse and keyboard while you have something else going on in your VR. That's not really the best experience. That's really a shame, because I'm pretty sure it's easy to fix and it's not really too big of an issue. It just needs someone to look at it and solve it. And this is one of the probably most problematic things with Steam and, SteamVR and Steam in general. Steam is proprietary. It doesn't matter how well they behave towards the Linux community. And they do. I mean, I actually really am grateful to Valve for bringing their platform to Linux and for bringing SteamVR and everything that's attached to Linux. But what happens in the open source world, since we are few people, but we're very technical and we know what we're doing, is that if we have something that doesn't work, we can fix it ourselves. It doesn't really need Valve to fix such a simple issue. We just need the source code. If we had the source code for SteamVR, we would be able to probably fix these issues. Another big issue that really bothers me with VR and Linux is that in SteamVR, you have something that's really, really nice. You see, all VR headsets that have been released by Valve have this very nice camera on the front, or multiple cameras in case you have like an index or something, that, allows you to see what's going on outside of VR. While the camera actually works, and you can even use it as a webcam for how weird that sounds, the real functionality that this camera would allow doesn't really work. You see, on SteamVR on Windows, you can see an outline of what's going on in the real world. And that's one of the coolest things that I would really, really like to have. And this actually currently doesn't work on Linux. There are some other minor issues that I wanted to mention, like the fact that the lighthouses that actually allow your headset and controllers to be tracked inside of your room. What typically happens is that when you turn off VR, they're sent into sleep mode. Again, this is not supported on Linux. And I've seen that there are projects out there that try to solve this issue. And while people are reporting that it actually works for them, it doesn't really work for me. I'm not sure why. Maybe because the hardware is older. I don't really know, to be honest. But the fact remains that VR on Linux currently is kind of half-baked. Now, moving on to how you can get most of these things to actually work on Linux, and the way that you can have probably the best experience, but if not the best, maybe the one that has the least friction, is that you have to opt into a Linux beta for SteamVR. And while it's listed as a beta, it's actually a previous version of SteamVR. It's 1.14. And once you're on that branch, you immediately notice that some things actually do work. The Z-index issue is fixed, and the desktop view kind of works. It has some really big issues, like it lags pretty badly. Not all the times, which is weird. Sometimes it lags, and controlling the cursor inside of the desktop view on Linux is very awkward because the cursor positioning is completely wrong, and it makes controlling your mouse with the controller actually really strange. It creates a weird disconnect, and to be honest, this problem really shouldn't be there. And this isn't really the only issue. Half of the time it just plain doesn't work. The desktop view, I mean, particularly when you get into a game, I have two monitors, so this gets probably even weirder. When you open most games in VR, there's still a window that's projecting something onto your monitor. And when you have like a full screen window, in your desktop, controlling it from inside VR doesn't really work because you're clicking a window containing the game that you're playing But anyway, if you can ignore those things and if you just want to play some games, that's actually pretty good. Let's talk about games. And because this is it's a VR headset. What else are you going to do? You're going to play games with it. First off, the first game you probably want to play is Half-Life Alyx. And this is probably the biggest reason why I wanted a VR headset, because I am a huge Half-Life fan and I wanted to play Half-Life Alyx. And I haven't been able to for years now. And now that I actually had a VR headset, I could finally play it. And Half-Life Alyx, it's a great game, really awesome, particularly if you're just getting into VR. It really helps you to get accustomed to the mechanics and how it works. It's native on Linux and it's powered by Vulkan, which is really, really nice. It's probably the best experience with a VR game on Linux that I've ever had to this point. There's an issue. Mods. Apparently, Half-Life Alyx mods aren't really supported on Linux. That's really a bummer because the game is pretty short, and once you finish it, what else are you going to do with it? You're going to play mods because the engine is pretty great, and whatever you can do inside the game it's a story-driven game, so you're not going to be able to, well, at least some people do, but I'm not the kind of person that replays games that are story-driven. It's just a thing that I don't typically do. So you're going to want to play mods, of course. And there are lots of mods out there, although the tooling around Half-Life Alyx is still pretty limited to this day. The community has gone out of their way to make actually great content for it. And if you want to play any of that on Linux, what you have to do is tick the Proton box. So yeah, you have to play a native game through Proton, because Valve couldn't be arsed to actually make mods work properly for Half-Life Alyx on Linux. Again, VR on Linux kind of sounds like it's half-baked. It's not that it doesn't work, but it's still not 100% there. And it's just in some dumb ways that I don't really understand why they're leaving the whole platform in this state. It's just weird. As for other games that you would want to play in VR, Proton is one of the greatest technologies we could have ever hoped for as far as VR on Linux goes. Because it allows me and everyone else that has one of these and wants to play on Linux to experience anything but Half-Life Alyx. If we wouldn't want to rely on Proton, we couldn't play anything but Half-Life Alyx. Probably there are a couple of exceptions out there, but I don't really know any other game that natively supports VR on Linux. I've tried Beat Saber. Of course, it's a big VR hit, and it's a really fun game, and it works very well in Proton. But what I quickly found out is that Beat Saber actually heavily relies on mods to get the best out of it. I mean, yes, you can play the core game, but it's just half of what you could experience. And to my surprise, there's actually quite a decent Linux community around modding Beat Saber. Most of the mods are very weird to install on Linux because they're mods for a Windows game that you're running through Proton. There's a lot of magic involved in how all these things work, to be honest. There are some mod loaders that you want to rely on for Linux if you want to mod Beat Saber. And again, these are specifically tailored towards modding Beat Saber on Linux. These tools are aware of the fact that it's a very weird thing and they are able to work out most of the magic that makes them work. The other really great games that I wanted to talk about are Pavlov Vr, which, well, there's no better way to explain it than saying that it's basically Counter-Strike in VR. It's really as simple as that, and it's a very fun game. It's multiplayer only. Well, you have some stuff that you can do if you don't want to play with other people, like you can play with bots, or you can play like training maps or something. This type of game really shines when you're playing with other people. It's really fun, extremely engaging, and very well done, actually. It has some quirks, but of course, VR as a concept is really, really young, despite being a few years old at this point. So, of course, it's gonna be quirky, but it's pretty well done. And there's more stuff coming with that game. The modding community is amazing. Again, I'm playing this with Proton. And fortunately, mods are built into the Steam Workshop, so you don't really have to do anything if you want to mod Pavlov. You just really want to download stuff from the Steam Workshop. And if you're trying to join a game that has some mods, then it's just going to download them automatically. So as far as that goes, modding Pavlov is frictionless. You don't have really to do anything. And some other really fun things about Pavlov are that there are actually Call of Duty zombie maps remade in Pavlov VR, and replaying those same maps in VR, it just felt amazing. I don't even know what to say. Pavlov is really a great game. It has lots of potential, still not fully realized, and that's a good thing, because the game is, as it is right now, it's very fun, but there's more stuff coming, which is just great. And the modding community, again, it's just awesome. The other really big game that I just finished the story for is Boneworks. That game is a whole rabbit hole in and of itself, and one of the must-have games if you have VR headset. And again, this all works flawlessly on Linux. All of these games have some quirks and some weird stuff going on, but none of the issues that I've had has anything to do with Linux or with Proton. And honestly, Proton just works and makes these games just work, which is probably the greatest thing. Another thing that I wanted to mention, if you have a VR headset and you want to play on Linux and you are going to use Proton, make sure to use Proton version 5.13. Whatever, because at the time of filming this, if you're using version 6 or Proton Experimental, games just don't work, and that gets confusing because you're using Proton and it's a VR game. It's a very weird scenario. So what I assumed at some point was just that, well, this game doesn't work with Proton. Then I realized that I recently switched to using Proton Experimental by default, and then I tested like older versions like 5.13, which in particular seems to be the go-to version for VR games, and magically they work. Everything works. So just a heads up, be sure to use the right versions of Proton. The last thing I wanted to touch on are non-Steam games for VR. There's not a huge selection out there, but there are some games on itch.io, particularly Ancient Dungeon, I think that's called. It's an early access version of what's gonna be Ancient Dungeon, and it's already on Steam. At least the coming soon page is on Steam, so you can have a look at that. It's a voxel-style dungeon crawler, roguelike. I guess it's more of a roguelite. But it's pretty fun. It's really scary sometimes, but it's really cool. And the way you play that with Steamvr on Linux through Proton is you just add the game as a non-Steam game and then use Proton on it, and it just works, which is pretty cool. Just the fact that we have VR games and VR stuff that's not even really integrated into Steam that just works on Linux because Valve standardized on the protocol and the way it works. I mean, it's just great. And this really leaves me in a weird position because in one way, Valve is giving us so much. They seem to be actually very invested into the Linux ecosystem, but at the same time, they do these things that are half-baked for no apparent reason. They've done so much, and they're like, there's just 1% left to make this whole experience just great. If it wasn't for the issues that I've talked about in the beginning of this video, VR on Linux would be perfect. Would be just plain perfect. Anyway, the fact remains that since I got this thing, again, a few months ago, I've been playing it, I don't want to say non-stop, because this is really tiring and physically challenging. It's not really, I'm not really the kind of person that experiences motion sickness or that kind of thing, but just having a toaster on your face, having to wave your arms around like a crazy person, it actually is pretty tiring, and you cannot really play more than, say, an hour at a time. Anyway, I've been playing this a lot with the current problems that we have. What does this mean? Where does this lead us? The answer is, if you want to get into VR and you are a Linux fan, you're a person that likes to use Linux and doesn't want to use Windows or other operating systems, and for the love of God, don't buy anything that Oculus makes, because that's just plain face-hugging Facebook malware right there. Buy something that is actually supported on Linux. Buy an HTC Vive for a lot cheaper than modern VR headsets. You can get these secondhand pretty easily right now. Buy a Valve Index if you have the money. I'm pretty sure that those are pretty great, and the experience should really be pretty much the same, if not better, just because the hardware is a lot better. And have at it. Have fun playing VR on Linux. It's been a great experience. I would recommend it to anyone. To be honest, I'm really looking forward for Valve to fix these issues. And if they don't really want to fix them, just give us the source code. Just give it to us. We'll fix everything. We will make these things work so much better, and not just on Linux, because if we had the source code for SteamVR, we would probably also have some shared code with Windows version, and everything would be better, and everyone would benefit from it, both the users and Valve. So anyway, guys, this is going to wrap it up for today's video. If you liked it, please make sure to press the thumbs up button down there, and also subscribe to my channel if you want more of this. Remember to join the TechPills community at techpills.technology/community. Thank you again, guys, very much for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.